unification of the entire world in one single market. So, what are the tenets of this New World Order? What are the tenets of neoliberalism, of the neoliberal economic system? And what are its effects? What have been its effects? I'll start by quoting again, and I'll be quoting a lot of different sources because I think they're more worth listening to than just me. I'll start by quoting Chomsky, who says that neoliberalism is capitalism with the gloves off. It represents an era in which business forces are stronger and more aggressive and face less organized opposition than ever before, and where it's increasingly difficult to challenge business and next to impossible for non-market, non-commercial, and democratic forces to exist at all. Neoliberalism is the promotion of free trade, of deregulation. In their rhetoric, they say they want to get government out of economics, that economics will function better for everyone without any sort of force impeding it, getting in its way. And NAFTA has essentially been, was essentially the first major free trade agreement, at least that the United States put together. That was between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Basically, it is a taking down of national borders. No? It's a disintegration of national borders. But only for business interests, just like Joe was saying. It's not a disintegration of national borders for the working class. It's especially not for those in the third world, for those in Mexico, for those in Central America, South America, Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, wherever it may be. But it does allow for the free flow of capital. It does allow for the 1% to do what they want with the world. No? And it puts the government at the behest of business interests. To see the effects that NAFTA has had just in the first year that it was in effect, in the first year, 1994, salaries in Mexico decreased between 40 to 50%, while the cost of living, the canasta básica, increased by 80%. The price of basic things, the most elemental things, the price of tortilla has gone up exponentially. It's now more expensive. Tortilla is more expensive in Oaxaca than it is here in the United States, even though that's the staple food there. And that is a direct result of NAFTA and a direct result of taking down the protections that the Mexican government had at one point for its people and for its corn producers. The same thing happens with beans, the same thing happens with cotton, and we could go on. In the United States, since NAFTA took effect, there have been 29 million jobs lost to outsourcing. And this isn't just NAFTA, this is free trade all over the world. NAFTA is just one part of the neoliberal puzzle. We have free trade, we have CAFTA in Central America, we have free trade agreements with Colombia, we have free trade agreements with Chile, we have free trade agreements with Japan, with Australia, with Korea, with the vast majority of the world. And it affects us as negatively as it affects them. Here we're losing manufacturing jobs. We've lost those good jobs, those good union jobs, mostly, with good salaries, with benefits, with pensions, and we're not getting them back. And it's not that those benefits, it's not that those good salaries are going somewhere else. The jobs are leaving, but all the benefits, all the good that we've fought for, that the workers have fought for here in the last 100 years, have disappeared. The maquiladora, the jobs in the maquiladoras and the maquilas in Juarez, in Mexico, and the rest of Latin America really, if anyone had the choice between those jobs and something better, no one would take them. We know that. But those people, because of neoliberal economics, are forced into it. Also in Mexico, since NAFTA, 1.3 million farm jobs have been lost. 1.3 million farm jobs. And that's largely because the biggest transnational companies that send their crops, corn, beans, cotton, the things that are grown in Mexico, those companies are largely subsidized. Up to 40% of their net farm income is subsidized by the U.S. government. So really, when we talk about free trade, it's not really free. And what it is that this system of free trade, this neoliberal system, is set up to ensure the continued imperial domination, economic domination of the United States in the Americas and in the worldwide marketplace. Now, again, NAFTA is not the only part of this puzzle. In southern Mexico and in Central America, they've been developing the Plan Puebla-Panama, which essentially seeks to get the subsistence farmer, to get the small farmer out of the countryside into the cities where they're working in maquilas, where they migrate not only to the cities but to the United States, and be the cheap mano de obra that industry needs. This is what's fueling migration, just like Joe said, our modern migration. And this is what's fueling an increasing amount of forced labor, slavery. It's what's fueling an increasing amount of people surviving off of the black market. This neoliberalism is not working for much of anyone. Now, neoliberals, the people who create this system, who support this system, use the rhetoric of freedom to describe what they want to do. They talk about the free market, free enterprise, personal responsibility, especially if you're poor. And this is something that comes from people like Hayek, people like Milton Friedman. But we know, and we have to say, and we have to keep saying very clearly, we have to say that capitalism is not freedom. Capitalism is exploitation, and it's violent. And this neoliberalism, which is a return to the days before the New Deal, to the days before government social welfare programs, that this return to that sort of savage capitalism is violence visited upon the poorest among us, but not only them, also the middle class, who benefited from the higher wages and the benefits that were essentially encouraged and protected by the government in a period in about the 30 years after World War II. That was an era of capitalism essentially guided by the philosophy of Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, which said that government had a responsibility in the capitalist system to ensure employment, to ensure that there was not massive unemployment. And that was the only way that the capitalist system was to survive, because of the massive instability caused by the world wars and because of the threat of communism. Today, the threat of communism doesn't exist, and the capitalist class does not see any reason why, does not see any threat from the people. So those benefits, those living wages that we fought so much for, are being gutted. Now, a quote, another economist, David Harvey, says that The freedoms neoliberalism embodies reflects the interests of private property owners, businesses, multinational corporations, and financial capital, not the freedoms of the common person. And like I said, neoliberalism is a return del capitalismo salvaje. No? And we see that in the massive militarization that is taking place all over the world. When the Cold War ended, since the Cold War ended, the U.S. government and governments around the world have been spending more money on their militaries, despite the fact that they say that there's not much of a threat to capitalism anymore. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. I'll go back to Marcos, Subcomandante Marcos, who says that in the cabaret of world capitalism, that the government is essentially performing a striptease. That it strips down everything that makes it up until it gets to the very essence of what is it, the very bare essence, the last bit of what it is. And that's the ability to repress. It's the ability to violently control the system. And to illustrate this, one of the requirements of the new free trade agreements, there were just free trade agreements installed with Colombia, with Korea, with Australia. One of the new requirements to these free trade agreements is to have U.S. military bases put in to control the population. Why? Because the population doesn't want the neoliberal system. It doesn't want free trade. It doesn't benefit anything from it. But they're prepared, because neoliberalism is the antithesis of democracy, they're prepared to do it by force. Now, I'll quote Tariq Ali, who says that this is the permanent tension that lies at the heart of a capitalist democracy and is exacerbated in these times of crisis. In order to ensure the survival of the richest, it is democracy that has to be heavily regulated rather than capitalism. Let's not mince words. Neoliberalism, the free market, capitalist globalization stand diametrically opposed to the freedom and well-being of the 99%. It threatens democracy. Who are the losers in this stage of capitalism? Very obviously, it's the working class in this period of deindustrialization. It's the middle class who sees its wages stagnate, who sees its wages go down, who sees the cost of living go up. It's the indigenous, as Marcos will tell you, who are not integrated into the capitalist system as anything other than slaves. And in fact, this stage of capitalism is nothing more than a continuation of colonialism, of imperialism, and of industrialist capitalism. Now, again to quote Marcos, I'm wrapping up. He says that when trying to impose its economic model, its economic, political, social, and cultural model, neoliberalism looks to subjugate the millions of beings, and get rid of or marginalize those that don't have any place in its new parting of the world. But it turns out that these disposable people, Marcos says, rebel and resist against those that want to get rid of them. And it is our responsibility to resist. And not just by giving the Zapatistas words of support, but to open up new spaces for resistance, for good government, and to work to organize a new economic system. That's the only option that they've left us. As Kisden would say, it's not healthy to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And our society is sick. We need to resist. Hopefully this movement is the start of that. Thank you very much.
Allowing any questions afterwards? We have 3 more presenters, so we'll have a question and answer right afterwards. Next is from the Mujer Obrera, Lorena Andrade.